Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the annual Key Issues Forum. My name is Mike Davis. I'm a proud board member of Roca and also Vice President of Campus Safety at Northeastern University. And I'm proud really to help facilitate a discussion really that I think is the conversation we need to be having around elements of the criminal justice system, system change, and really getting us to think about things in a different, and I would say more humanistic way, right? I've been involved in the criminal justice system and policing for the past 30 years, done some work with the Department of Justice, been around the country, and I can tell you that around the country, I've seen, little glimpses, little bright lights of what's possible. We have some of those bright lights of what's possible on the call today. And really I think at the forefront from the nonprofit side, it really is the work that Roca is doing and is intentionally engaging in and has been for the past several decades. We're on the precipice of something very special here, and thinking about systems change and think about outcomes that are really the intended outcomes that I think we all want when we think about the efficacy of these systems and the criminal justice system writ large. And the thing that Roca does, I would say exceptionally well, is a couple things. One is it looks at human beings and their potential and possibility, really is focusing in on the individual and what that individual could be, right? There are no castaways, there are no throwaway human beings. This is really about looking at every individual as a potential contributing member of society with their unique talents and skill sets. And the second is it identifies areas within systems by which we can engineer things, coalesce things in a way to get collectively aspired to outcomes. And I think this is really what we're going to exemplify today as we go through this conversation. And you saw in the advertisement for this and the sign up, we have a very esteemed group of folks from different sectors of systems that are engaged in this work that we'll be hearing from. What I encourage you to do is obviously, think about, incisive questions you can ask, put those in the chat, I believe, and we'll get to a Q&A part here as we go through. First, we're going to start with a video that really speaks to system change, right? And exemplifies the work that's been occurring within Roca. The reason I joined Roca back in 2018 is because of the possibilities that are really, exemplified in this video. And as you hear from our speakers, this stuff is contagious, and it's not just our sector in the nonprofit world, but it's also folks that are thinking conscientiously about this stuff in their various roles and through their professional lives. So let's cue the video and let's begin our conversation.
Dealing with these systems as if they're sort of entities unto their own, but systems are actually made of people. And because people can change, systems can change. We want to create systems change, we all have to work on it together, and we kind of have to get to the human part in order to be able to do that.
What Roca does is focus on one individual at a time. It doesn't bring everyone in a group and say, let's huddle up, and it focuses on the intense effort to connect with one individual at a time. And that's what government could do a lot better of. Instead of being a case, client, suspect, victim, it's the one person at a time. What are we doing for that person? Where's that person going? How can we help that person? How can we connect that person to other services? How can we better coordinate? These are all things that lead to the enhanced well-being of the individual, which leads to better communities.
I went across the street to Roca, and the staff, Ryan was there, he invited me in, showed me around, and the thing that caught my eye is I saw a lot of young people there interacting with people, and it looks like they were trying to accomplish something, and I got invited to come back later. Later on, I started going out to these community meetings, and I saw Roca staff attending those meetings, doing things. So I'm saying, finally, an organization that's out there on the street, doing what they say they do.
How is it we can come together as people, understand each other and bring the humanity back into the process and figure out what we can do differently that A, gets us more of what we hope to do in the first place, but B, is, more fair, more just.
Peacemaking circles are great. It's a circle, which obviously is a great way to communicate because there's no hierarchy in a circle. The idea is that everyone is an equal participant, has equal opportunity to participate, and everyone's valued equally.
First time that I remember doing a circle was with Chelsea PD, and it was extremely uncomfortable, especially as a participant. Coming from being a street kid, and then all of a sudden I'm sitting in a room with 4 or 5 cops. Definitely uncomfortable, but by the end of that circle, I ended up becoming really close with one of the police officers from Chelsea. Until this day, it gives you a safe place to get things off your chest. It's a good learning experience. You get to hear different people's stories too. Because in a circle, they have a talking piece. Whoever has the talking piece is the only one talking, so you hear different people's stories on whatever the situation might be. And you get from that, and at the same time you can, get out what you gotta get out. Even if what you plan for the circle for the outcome to be, and it's not that, it's like the guys always seem to pick something different out of it. So say one participant has an issue with another participant, right? So they got into a fist fight or something, and our hope is to squash the beef and them to be friends again somewhere in the future. Even if that doesn't happen, both those guys will have a different understanding and respect for each other.
Everybody at Roca got some type of run-in with the police, usually bad. So I feel like when you incorporate the problem into the solution, it just makes it better for everybody, We get to see different sides. It just makes the community work better. Because if I know the cop and he knows me, things will run smoothly.
Peacemaking circles, along with Roca's other strategies around systems change, are really bringing about sustainable long-term change in the communities within which they're working. In other instances, for example, where police are involved, are coming upon a sort of a dangerous interaction, instead of reacting in a very negative way for the youth that are involved, they're working in a way that is proactively trying to protect those involved and those that may be impacted and affected.
Contrary populace, we didn't create this system the way it is. It's the way things are in this country have been going on for years. And the only way you can change this is working together. The citizens have to work with the government, have to work with non-governmental agencies, have to work with the police. And it's just got something that we have to want to do, and we have to work on it together.
I absolutely believe that it takes everyone to change systems. Everyone who touches the system must think differently about what the system currently produces. At the end of the day, the most compassionate thing you can do for another human being is show genuine interest. Wow. So as you can see, the work that Roca produces is transformational. So, and it really is 2 pieces, right, which we're going to get into now. One is the humanization of systems in a very intentional way to create different outcomes. Obviously, it's beneficial for the well-being of each individual, and thus our collective well-being is enhanced. And then second is how do we do that through systems change. So let's go right into it with Sheriff. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the things happening, some of the great things happening under your watch as Sheriff of Middlesex County.
Thank you very much, Chief, and thank you for your leadership with Roca and in policing across the country, and especially college policing across the country. I know you are a national leader. Many people have mentioned that to me. So thank you for your involvement in the community, not just being isolated to an institution of higher learning, but sharing that experience with Roca. I want to say thank you to Molly. If there was one person I noticed in every picture that she appeared in that entire video when we started, it was Molly. There's something radiant about that woman that comes across even in photos, that smile, and just the incredible leadership, making an impact on the lives of clients and equipping them with tools to live happier and healthier and more productive lives. And Thank you to Sulai and Leon and Commissioner Bermudez for participating here today. As a sheriff, I've seen Roca's impact extend beyond young adults. So while Roca is focused on young adults, I've seen it extend beyond that population. In fact, at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, we've witnessed a secondary effect from our partnership with Roca, that being the way in which the organization's work has resonated with our staff. So the training and the work that we've done with Roca has resonated outside of that population and that unit. I think that Sulai has seen this firsthand impact, and it's driven a lot of this, quite honestly, in our facility. The passion and energy with which Roca approaches its work is quite palpable. Simply put, Roca helps us do our work even better. There are 3 areas I'd like to briefly touch upon to demonstrate that. One is changes to staff training, specialized units, and then some new initiatives that we're engaging in with that really this Roca has helped us with. Chief, you just mentioned about the idea of humanizing systems, and that's key to us. A large part of our success of the Middlesex Sheriff's Office is our incredibly dedicated corrections professionals. Sometimes, though, the best way to improve a system is to learn from those outside the system. Sometimes we all live within our own fields in our own communities too closely, and we don't reach out and find out some new ideas. The benefit of having Roca at our facilities is that they're modeling strategies for engaging young adults that can also be utilized elsewhere. And watching how Roca interacts with young adults, our staff has gained insight into improving their communication. Examples are like body language is viewed different, like different cultures represented in our incarcerated population that we've learned from Roca. And that message is also driven home by our general and specialized staff training. We're currently working with Roca to train our new recruit class. We're having a new class, and as part of this training, we will be having some cognitive behavioral therapy training brought to us by Roca. We actually had a 3-hour block of training this past week, but due to the loss of one of our office, we had to move it. So it'll be coming up. And we intend not to just make that a standard part of our new recruit training, but as part of our annual in-service training for all staff as they go year after year after year, which I think will make an incredible impact across all units. We recognize that all correctional employees, not just our treatment providers, can play an important role in helping not just young adults, but all adults make better choices when confronted, especially the young adults, with impulses. And the reality is that corrections officers have more one-on-one time with incarcerated individuals than anyone else in our facilities. And they're in a position to help incarcerated individuals with positive decision-making, whether it's during a reentry plan, as part of a CBT program, or just a conversation on the unit. And this is where the guardian versus warrior shift we often speak about in law enforcement is occurring. It's about changing the culture of corrections. And one way to do this is through training. This past summer, we conducted a national scan of the training landscape in corrections. Came out of my desire to reimagine our own training and the conversations I was having with sheriffs across the country as president of Major County Sheriffs of America, and a trip to Europe to see how they were doing corrections, especially with young adult offenders there too. We found some agencies employing promising strategies, but nothing that was a comprehensive shift like I expected. And there were really no established best practices. So we had to, as we often do in Middlesex, we had to create our own best practice and establish a best practice, as we did with our young adult offender unit, our medication assisted treatment unit, or our housing unit for military veterans. What we're looking to do at the MSO is to create a hybrid approach to officer training that could serve as a national model, and Roca would be an important part of this. It'll be less focused on the paramilitary approach to training, instead emphasizing a number of humanistic topics, things that you all be familiar with: trauma-informed care, social learning theory, risk assessment, cognitive behavioral therapy, of course, motivational interviewing, cultivating detective factors and relationship skills and boundaries. And we're consulting with the University of Cincinnati Institute. They're studying in depth our current recruit training curriculum. We look forward to including Roca and other community stakeholders in the redevelopment of our office training program. This research-driven approach to training really stems from what we have nationally on corrective programming here at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office. We believe quality programming stems from rigorous data collection. I always say vision without good data is just a hallucination, because you're just flying blind. It can be used to either stop an inefficacious program or to correct a program to create greater efficacy. And our model is unique programming for unique populations. It allows us to address underlying criminogenic factors, to improve safety in the facility, to drive down recidivism. And many of you on the call might be familiar with our PAC unit, People Achieving Change Together, our young adults that Sulai teaches in. We also have units like this for military veterans and those receiving medication. As I talked about Roca's philosophy spread, how it spread into our staff, these specialty programs spread and benefit our whole entire facility. And the data we collect from these programs helps refine all of our efforts at the MSO. So we can ensure that while our treatment plans are highly individualized, our standard is universally high across everywhere. And this shows in our results. As of last month, our facility-wide recidivism rate was 22.5%, which is lower than the state average and much lower than the national average. But our one-year recidivism rate for our specialty programs is even lower, showing that unique programming with some of the things that we're learning with Roca has an impact itself. So 22.5 in our facility-wide, and our medication-assisted treatment is 10.7%. In our housing unit for military veterans is 14.3%. In our young adult offender unit, a unit that you would expect, as we have historically come to know, much higher recidivism than almost every other age group, is the 16.8% recidivism rate. Now, I want to caution that's a relatively low end there because of COVID, but it's still very promising. It's fashionable to use the word equity, but that's really what stems from for me. Too often in corrections, equity is seen as providing the same opportunities to everyone. But I think we're all familiar with the photo of the three kids or the three children in the fence, and only one kid can see over the fence without assistance, right? And one can see it over by standing on the tips of his toes, and one can't see over it at all. So equity isn't getting everyone the same size box. That just plays out the height average on a new level. It's about getting the right size box that allows everyone to see over the fence really at the same level. That's what we're trying to do with every initiative we undertake at the MSO. I'll just speak briefly about our new initiatives. Our Family Services Unit, Women's Pre-Release Center, and Project Citizen. Our Family Services Unit came out exactly from this idea of equity. People were often reaching out to me about their loved one that was incarcerated, and they were worried about them. They had some information that would be helpful. They were concerned about their self-harm issues. And I realized that I really loved when I got these calls because I could step in and do some of the work that I love to do most, which is engaging with families and people to make sure they know their loved one is being watched for, and then to provide better care for the individual inside. But the fact is, these were only a couple of people that knew me or knew someone important enough that knew me to be able to call me. And there were hundreds and thousands of others that didn't have the same type of access. So we want to create an equitable and more formal way to engage with families. I always say that you've got the incarcerated individuals, you've got the victims of their crimes, and then you've got the unseen victims, which is the family members and loved ones of those that are incarcerated. So we did a national scan to find out what programs were, what we could do around the country. We couldn't find any, so we actually created our own a family services coordinator in February of 2020, right before COVID, which was a very good timing for us because it helped so many of the families during this difficult time, and became a catch-all for concerned family members. In just over 18 months, we helped over 1,000 families, well over 13,000 minutes of communication. We rigorously track every data point we can, the type of contact, the type of complaint, the relationship, which, as you would mostly imagine on this call, you would mostly know would be moms. And one example is that 21% of our engagements from the Family Support Services Office involve family members that were 18 to 24, but only 16% of our population. But they're only 16% of our population. So it shows that there's more concern there. I'm going to just tell you, we had a women's pre-release unit. I'm just going to wrap it up here quickly because I know we've got plenty more time. I could go on forever about my programs. I'm really proud of them. By the way, I'll say I'm really proud of the programs we have at the Middlesex Sheriff's Office, but you shouldn't have to come to jail to get good programming. We have a women's pre-release unit, which has been really one of the most inspiring units we have. And then we've even started a civics education opportunity here too. We've had almost 200 individuals go through this programming. I think it's really important that people not know just their, and by the way, poorer schools have much less rates of teaching, 30% lower rates of teaching civics education. And I think it's really important for people to know not just their privileges, but their responsibilities and the power they have. I'm going to close it off there, Chief, and then be ready for any questions, should there be any for me in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sheriff, and thank you for your leadership and really the level of innovation and comprehensive nature of what you're doing. And I think that the line of the day is you shouldn't have to go to jail to get good programming, right? I mean, that's the effort. But for people who do fall short, right, and get involved in the process, having hope through opportunities you provide is really key. So let's cut to the commissioner here, talk a little bit about the work in her effort here and how it connects to the overall notion of systems change and humanization within systems.
Great, thank you. It was perfect segue, Sheriff, to what I'm going to say, because like you, we found that our 16 to 24-year-olds and probation, accounted for a third of our group, but accounted also for almost 50% or more of our rearrest statistics. So we created, specialized units within our adult probation division to have 16 to 24-year-olds, and then recast probation as a program that has these milestones that for young people to, based on achievement and goal setting, et cetera, where they accumulate keys, they graduate, they have all, and these are all in growth areas. So we basically recast also the role of the probation officer as an agent of change, as somebody who's a coach as opposed to a referee. When you think about it, probation's used to being calling the rules infractions and making sure that everybody's, sort of playing clean, but they don't have a skin in the game. We want our officers to have a skin in the game, because this is about people, as Mike was saying before, and that we've also adapted the notion that Roca does so well of transformational relationships. We require that of our probation officers. They are to get to know the young people. They are to work with the young people as on a growth chart, if you will, using CBT, because we know that at the heart of a lot of challenges they face is the think, feel, do cycle that they get into, right? And so we use carry guides, we're now getting Roca training on Rewire, and we use a number of things, including our version of peacemaking circles that we use. We've created kind of this parallel process also with the staff, as you mentioned this a little bit, but I want to go a little deeper into it. We believe here that it's all a parallel process, right? And therefore, like, I conduct all my meetings with senior staff, with all staff at any group, in a circle. And people have to get used to it, from the get-go. And now I see others doing it in their own divisions and in their own, work, which is great. It's great to see. So with this one size fits one approach, I think that sort of exemplifies the humanistic approach. It's about people, it's for people. And then also that we separate, we use the restorative framework also, separating the behavior from the person, that we will have unconditional support for you as a person. What you're doing, we don't like so much sometimes, right? But we believe in your ability to take care of it, right? And repair harm and be able to get your life back together, because no person lacks that opportunity, that ability, right? We do our contracts that we have with our credible messenger mentors, and for our transformative mentoring, have a no reject eject clause, right? So that so our beliefs are built into the way we interact with providers too, so that there's no creaming allowed, so quote unquote. When it gets difficult, we sit down, we figure it out, we try to make it work, right? Doesn't mean that it always works 100%, obviously, but the idea is that there's not a unilateral decision. Other little things we've done is that in the case notes, in the chrono notes, in the reports we send to the courts, et cetera, the words defendant, offender, probationer are not allowed to be used. People have names, you are to use their names, and in the beginning it was like, well, this is a government, document. It's like, your government documents have your name. Why can't their government documents have their name, right? And so that's been a little bit of an uphill battle, but we're definitely getting there. Definitely the chrono notes, that doesn't exist anymore. People who were a little reluctant, to call people clients or whatever. So now they're probation clients, or they use their names. And then the last thing I'm going to say that it requires a whole different meeting is that we've shifted a lot of our practice into the community. Oops, sorry. I put a timer on myself. Into the community, we put probation offices in areas where we had a high concentration of people residing in those areas, and all the programming out of those locations are open to and free to the public and to people on probation. So I'm going to leave it there because I know we have very little time, but happy to talk more about later when we do a Q&A. Thank you all, and thank you for inviting me, by the way.
Thanks, Commissioner. And look, what I've gathered, first of all, immense amount of work, a very comprehensive approach. And there's really two things. One is the focus on internal change and creating the dynamics, changing the dynamics of interaction inside the organization with the intention of creating different results outside the organization. And that's the aspect of leadership that's not often talked about, but is very much necessary. And then the second has to do with the labeling of human beings, right? Which we know is just, part and parcel of dealing with the volume of work that, inundates these systems. But to put a name to a person is to acknowledge them as an individual, inherently, automatically, and humanizes the approach in a way that which it hasn't. So let's go over to Leon, and you can talk about your work, especially thinking about young people and how the residual impact of these interactions can be detrimental, and what your work is to deal with that.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. It's always an honor for us at Citizens for Juvenile Justice to collaborate with Roca, who's been a longstanding ally and a member of our Massachusetts Juvenile Justice Coalition, in advocating for policies that support positive youth development and to really tap into the resilience of young people. It's really about creating better outcomes for our young people as they move into adulthood. When you look at the policy landscape, we have to always remember that the best interests of young people and our interests in safe communities are really in alignment. And when we invest in programming that builds pro-social skills, furthers education, and aids in rehabilitation, we not only help young people navigate the difficulties of their lives, we help them advance towards becoming productive members of our communities. We also know from research that young people, it's not as if they turn 18 and they're fully formed adults. They mature over time, and often they age out of delinquent behavior by the time they reach their mid-20s. And when we guide young people in meeting developmental milestones, that's really what's key. When we have programming like you have at Roca that helps young people finish school, get a job, start thinking about a career, taking steps that will lead them towards financial independence. Those are the things that help young people establish a firm foothold in responsible adulthood. And research shows that helping young people meet those milestones are what really help young people truly move on from offending behavior rather than being stuck in it. So when I look at the policy landscape over the last decade or so, there have been a number of tremendous successes. In 2018, we raised the lower age of the juvenile court's jurisdiction from age 7 to age 12. Now, when I started as an attorney back in 2000, I had to stand there in court next to a 7-year-old who was playing with an action figure and had no idea what was going on. Or I remember a case of a 10-year-old who was throwing milk at a friend in the school lunchroom, and then suddenly they're in court. And the old ideas of, that's going to teach a lesson. No, what it did is it pushed kids into the court system way too early. And it just started kids on this loop towards this pipeline to negative outcomes. Once we raised the lower age to 12, those cases have dropped to 0. And, the result of that is we led the country. We were one of the first, states to do that. And now other states are looking at us as a gold standard. As far as you're seeing other states who are beginning to follow suit and really follow suit behind our lead in raising the lower age. But the most important part of it, you had these young kids who, yes, they had issues they were dealing with. They'd experienced trauma. By keeping them out of the court system, we were able to get them connected with services earlier. We were able to direct them towards family resource centers where they were able to access supports, much earlier in the process, as opposed to having to churn through the court process. So again, kids have issues, you get them help, you build those skills that enable them to do better, and then you keep them out of the system. In 2018, we also, worked on and passed another real key reform, and that is expungement, which is all about when young people are, sometimes they're struggling as they're navigating those teenage years into adulthood. And yes, they make mistakes, but do we really want those mistakes to handicap them and their potential for the rest of their lives? Do we want them at 40 and 50, long after they've left, the mistakes of their youth behind, to still have to answer for those behaviors from decades before, when they've moved on and become different people because they have a record? So in 2018, as a part of the Criminal Justice Reform Act, we did get expungement in as a part of the bill, but quite frankly, we did it in a way that was ineffective. It was limited to one court appearance. And the way the law was interpreted is if you had, multiple counts on one charge, you were ineligible. So if I'm a kid and I get into a fight and, and the officer comes and says, stop, and I don't stop that punch in the middle of throwing it, and I get an assault and battery and a resisting arrest, there was no expungement. And so we saw that the law, even though it was passed, wasn't really meeting the needs of the young people who really fought and advocated for it. So we went back in 2020 as a part of the policing bill and said, you know what, we need to fix this law. We need to really, clarify it so it's actually a resource to help young people. So last year, one court appearance was defined by statutes to include multiple charges that are on the same case and arising out of the same incident. We also expanded it from 1 to 2. So now young people can expunge up to 2 convictions or adjudications, as well as up to 2 non-convictions or non-adjudications. What does this mean? For young people who, again, they have a rough spell, they make mistakes, they move on from their behavior, they're working hard, they're beginning to hit those milestones, but it becomes difficult because they have a record. They can go in, they can petition the court and say, yes, that's who I was at 17 or 18. Now I'm 25 or 26. I'm working, I'm starting a family of my own, and I don't want the mistakes of my past to continue to be an anchor as I'm moving forward. And we've opened up opportunity. And the last policy that I want to talk about, again, we raised the lower age, but we've also raised the upper age of the juvenile court system. So again, when I started as an attorney, I always say we drew an arbitrary line through 11th grade classrooms, across the Commonwealth, because if you were, up to 16, you were in the juvenile system, but once you turned 17, you went into the adult system and you could go to adult jail. And so we raised the age in 2013 to bring in 17-year-olds. And, there was concern expressed of what will happen and, will crime increase? Here's what's happened since we raised the age to bring 17-year-olds in. So since 2013, juvenile arrests have declined by 65%, with faster declines in violent and property crimes than the national average. The total number of juvenile court cases, child welfare, CRA, delinquencies, and youthful offenders have steadily declined since then, with a 39% decrease in juvenile court filings through fiscal year 2020. And delinquency and youthful offender arraignments have fallen 61% from 2013 to current. And so now we're in a position where we brought 17-year-olds, and our system with 17-year-olds is much smaller than it was before, when we only went up through 16. And now we're able to engage in a conversation about raising the age even further to absorb, young people who are merging into adulthood, starting with 18-year-olds. And that is our current campaign, to raise the age. We're looking at that because when we look at rates of recidivism in our system, 18 to 20-year-olds have the largest recidivism rate in the entire adult criminal justice system. We're talking about a 76% rearrangement rate and a 55% reconviction rate. When we look at 18 to 20-year-olds who are committed to the Department of Youth Services under the Youthful Offender Statute on very serious offenses, but they remain in the juvenile justice system to their 21st birthday, those recidivism rates fall to 46% for rearrangement and 22% for reconviction, because in the juvenile system, we have that positive youth development approach. We have case planning. We have, a different level of family engagement for every kid in the system. And so, so that's just a flavoring of some of the reforms we've done, which have reduced the number of young people in the system, enable young people to get help out of the system. And now we're able to look more boldly into the future to try to continue to create change, to just, again, it's about helping young people, even those who run into difficulty, navigate into adulthood effectively so that they become productive members of our society.
Well, what that exemplifies is a few things that are just, so important here to this conversation. One is, the intended outcomes of the past don't really fit us currently and contemporary. The old logic model, this doesn't serve us well here, right? It doesn't serve us well. We think about the brain science, and certainly doesn't serve us well. We think about societal safety as a whole. And so this work to reform laws, reform rules, and then more effectively humanize the process is so important. Let's cut to Sulai, and who's on the ground and really working with folks, through the programming of Roca, is to her experience, especially with CBT and the like. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Leon, thank you. Amazing, amazing, amazing. And Sheriff, Ms. Bermudez, Commissioner Bermudez, just thank you for your partnership and your continued belief, right? Because change is possible. So situations, I do all of my work is behind the wall. And as we know, situations affect what we think, what we feel, and what we do, which all affect each other, right? And CBT is a way of understanding the relationship between what we think, what we feel, and what we do, and how that relationship impacts our lives, right? Our young men are quick and reactive, right? Something happens and their immediate reaction is, you're not gonna disrespect me. That's it, we're fighting. I'm going into the hole and I'm not thinking about anything else. And so I've had this approach with the guys, right? So how do we start changing the way that we think and we feel and we do, right? How do we go from emotional driven behavior to intentional behavior, right? Value driven behavior. And there was a situation which, may sound small, but for this young person, it was big, right? And he had a Gatorade, it was put down, somebody took it. And this young man, I just so happened to be walking into the packed unit, to the sheriff's packed unit, and he was all over the place, right? Immediately, I pulled out these amazing little cards that Molly gives us. I don't know if you guys can see, but my first interaction with him was, slow down, right? How do we practice being present right now? What's going on? Talk to me about what happened. That would be the situation part of it, right? Oh, they took my Gatorade. They're going to learn. They're not messing with me. And so he starts spinning, right? Everything's so negative. Turns out, right? He's saying they're not going to disrespect me. I don't care if I go into SEG. I'm going to just lose the packed unit. All of this negative thinking. And then suddenly I say, let's stop. Let's slow down. Let's really focus on what we're doing right now, the here and now, right? And he just like breathes. He's like, oh, fine. Here we go with the CBT crap. And I'm like, no, I'm serious, right? I'm like, slow down. Let's figure this out. And I said, what's really going through your head? He's like, well, I had a bad conversation with my girlfriend over the phone. And I'm like, boom, right? It's not the Gatorade. It's what's going on outside. By the end, this young man looks at me. We have this whole CBT thing, the think, feel, do cycle. It went from like negative, I'm going to go into seg, to really saying, look, I really have to slow down, Sulai, you know? And I said, give me an example of slowing down. He said, well, I don't have ice cubes to hold, so maybe I could just run around the packed unit for a bit. And the beautiful thing about it was that one of the officers that were there, and I believe his name was Fritz, he helped me with CBT. He was like, look, sometimes we feel negative, right? And that's okay, but how do we think about the positive behind it? How do we look at this differently? In that moment, I was like, wow, CBT is powerful, not just for our young people, but for our staff. You know, it's difficult, right? Staff it's in there with the young people all day with different attitudes and different things going on. But my main thing with CBT and this specific young person was that he was able to identify what the real issue was, and he was able to slow down, really focus on the here and now, and label his emotions, right? In order for him to make a different choice. And that's what we do, right? We're not saying we have a magic wand and everything's gonna be okay in one day. CBT is something that you practice over and over and over and over again. And I would give a few more examples. Geez, I would probably have you guys here all day with me giving you examples, but I'll leave that for the Q&A. And I just want to thank you all for listening to me and being here. Thank you, Mike.
Wow, that's amazing. And you know, when I first came in contact with the brain science that Roca utilizes, you know, it was like, you know, it was kind of a Venn diagram of my philosophy with something that actually is scientifically proven, that it's not just something that is impactful to those who have struggled with it. It's impactful to all of us. You know, any self-help guru book tells you to be present, right? So amazing, right? And then understand your emotions at the moment, and then attribute that to the proper cause, right? So you're not looking at the latest thing, which had nothing to do with your precondition, right? To this moment, but it really is about something else. And when you recognize the moving parts that cause these, you know, these reactions, it's a level of freedom, you know, and control over yourself that you didn't think possible, right? And I think that is so important. So we got some questions here, and first I'll start off with one, and I'm really interested in, and I know Sheriff, I think you have to leave early, so I'll ask you, when you think about the impact of your work, and you think about, you know, the future, right? What would you see, especially in your role as you know, with you know, the major county sheriffs and the like? What is the one or two things that, you know, every sheriff's department should be looking at when it comes to thinking about changing the conditions, right, by which would enhance the level of success of folks that engage the criminal justice system? What are the one or two things you would tell a new sheriff that's important for them to focus on?
That's a great question, Chief. And I'm sorry, I do have to host this month's Major County Sheriffs of America webinar, so I will have to step off. But number one, I think let me just say this. My experience is different than most of my colleagues across the country. Right? 3,080 sheriffs, probably most were raised through a law enforcement background. I was initially a public defender, then a prosecutor, then a legislator focusing on healthcare, and then became sheriff. Not a usual track that most sheriffs have gone through, but has informed me in a way that, you know, I see public health and public safety as an incredible intersection. And really, more importantly, even for this crowd, the social determinants of health are also social determinants of justice involvement, right? And so this is what we're seeing every day. So I'd say a couple of things. Number one, don't be afraid to try. You know, we've had to start a program because nothing else existed. I'm not afraid to do that. I'd rather just copy something that worked and then maybe try and make it a little bit better in my shop. But oftentimes when you're cutting into new areas, there's not many models to utilize, especially if you're thinking a little bit ahead of some of your colleagues, I suppose, or at least your entire facility, not just me. So don't be afraid to try something or to establish something as best practices, and don't be afraid to admit failure. The worst thing you can do is be afraid to admit failure and continue to do, as Louis Diaz always says up here, if you continue to do what you've always been doing, you're going to continue getting what you've always gotten, right? So, you know, those are wide words. I mean, I love the grammatical, the the style of it. But I think if you're not, you need to try new stuff, but then you need to collect that data on it in order to judge whether or not it's working. And then to either end the program if it's not working, to go find a program that'll work better, or to make corrective actions in that program. And I'll say one last thing. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. So sometimes I'll have colleagues who'll say, I want to start a program and I'm going to need $1 million. I didn't need $1 million to start a housing unit for military veterans. Our young adult offender unit was a little bit more expensive, but it wasn't outrageous in any way, especially when you got partners like Roca that we can work together to get grant monies and other opportunities like that, right? And that honestly are committed to the same mission and want to step forward and help anyway, right? So don't be afraid to try. It's not as expensive as you might think. And then collect that data as much as you can so that you can correct your actions or just make better actions, and then replicate good programs as they come online. And then if a program doesn't have good data, then don't continue that program, change the program. It certainly don't replicate the damn program, right? We got too many programs out there that everyone says, oh, they're wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. There's no data to show it at all. And yet we copy them. And we miss an opportunity to create a new program that would be more efficacious because we're copying something that makes sense, someone says is working really well, and we're all inspired, and we just kind of go off on a tangent when we could be doing something more meaningful. So I'll leave it at that, Chief, if that answers your question. And I've got to leave the call now, but for any of those that are on the call, if you're looking for any further information that I can be helpful with, always here for you. And thank you to Molly and Sulai and Leon and all the people at Roca. And Commissioner, it's great to see all the great work you're doing. Thank you very much, Chief.
Thank you, Sheriff, and we certainly appreciate your time and your leadership and your innovation and your fearlessness, really, to go and try these things. This is what it takes. And one question I have, and I'll go to the commissioner here, is, when people, I guess when I hear New York, I think about these large, complex, deeply rooted systems, right, that are just immovable based upon just the sheer mass of them. How do you make change at scale and make it meaningful in an organization as large as yours? I think that's an important thing to get people to understand what's possible regardless of the size.
Yeah, well, it's a challenge for sure. And the advantage that I've personally had is that I started here in 2010 as the deputy for juvenile operations. So I had 3 years under Bloomberg and then 7 years with de Blasio. So that's how, and the work is still not even we've just scratched the surface. So I think that relates to one of the question in the Q&A that, basically you need time. These things take time. There's no question about that. But you can enhance the pace by, it's just this relentless, you have to pick kind of like a message, then stick with it and make sure every policy is related to that message so that it just gets tied in. The other piece is that you need to be out there for the entire, I think one of the biggest things that I did that worked was that I dedicated almost every Wednesday of my tenure to be out in an office talking with staff and having them throw things at me and talking about cases. One of the things is to build legitimacy. One thing that thankfully I had was that even though I didn't grow up in the probation ranks, I grew up in the youth serving and people serving ranks. And if they say, well, what about this? Because these kids are doing this or this client is doing that, but I could say, well, because I've been trained in motivational interviewing, restorative practices, and I could go toe to toe with my staff, in terms of what they were facing in that piece. And so those are all things that are really important. It was important for me. I almost, I've slacked off some, but at least once a week was sending, all staff emails about our work, about what I was doing, about what, and so I think basically treating the staff the way I was asking them to treat our clients was half the battle.
Yeah, and listen, I think, when you talk about this kind of multidimensional approach and humanizing these organizations, by which when someone joins an organization that's super large, and they get an employee number that's 25 digits long, right? It's difficult for them to kind of find their own person. And I think what you talked about is the humanization begins inside the organization and the intention, and not letting people get away with things because that's the way things have been done, right? That you are identified as a human being in this, and you're expected to be accountable to this new way of being, and you're valued at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And that's how this works. So real quickly, we got 5 minutes left. I want to just a few more things. Leon, I'm really interested in, when you think about, the future, I'm gonna ask the same thing, and you think about criminal justice reform at large, what are the top 2 priorities you say, for the future moving forward? If we go into, we're a couple of years away, beginning in a month here, from 2020 and what that brought. We're on the back end of a pandemic, but we still have, issues in our major cities. How should we be thinking about, reducing crime amongst our young people? Top 2 thoughts.
Yeah. So, to really, illustrate something that, Sheriff Koutoujian said, the importance of data, making sure that approaches are working. One of our longstanding, battles that we fought at CFJJ is the need to have real transparency throughout decision-making in the juvenile and youth justice systems, and really making sure that data is disaggregated in a way that we can look at things like race and gender and economic status to really drill down and identify which young people are struggling and where we need more resources. The other piece that I think we really have to, and I know there's federal funding that's out there, we're in the midst of a full-blown youth mental health crisis coming off this pandemic. There's really no other way to say it. You've had young people in communities that were hardest hit. In addition to everything else they were going through, kids have gone through grief and loss. They've had gaps in learning, and these kids are really struggling. And so to me, this is a crucial time. We can take the old, just come down and be hard on them perspective, and these kids are going to end up in that dropout pipeline, and we're going to see them show up in our systems. Or we can really be proactive and be restorative and really try to get supports and services to these young people to help them unpack and address a lot of the trauma brought on by the pandemic that's stacked on top of the trauma they already had, to try to get these kids the help that they need when they need it, and really keep them from advancing through our systems.
Well, I can appreciate that. And listen, the mental health piece, I just read something today about the opioid epidemic, and like this, the convergence of these things is just so pernicious on our individual collective psyche. So well said. And we definitely gotta enhance our focus on outcomes. And Sulai, you're gonna have the last word here, and I really want to hear from you about, as we think about the young people that are involved in Roca, what are some things we should really understand about their experiences and how we can align our systems to better support them?
I think for me, one of the things that resonates in my head when you say that trauma, right? Our young people are full of trauma, and some people don't understand that, right? So when we believe that a young person, well, why is this young person doing this? Well, we gave them so many chances, and this is why I love Roca, and I've worked with Roca for so many years, right? And I was also a participant here, is because we truly dig deep into trauma, right? What's the root of the problem? And helping our young people understand, right, that it's okay. It's okay to feel these things. It's okay to feel this way. And with CBT, we don't take the clinical approach, right? We sit down and we talk about real life things with them. And I can't stress it enough. I think trauma really is the root of the problem with our young people. I always hear, your brain doesn't develop until it's like 26, 27. And reality is that for some it may take longer, depending on what trauma they've endured while they were younger. So.
Oh, that's so important. And I know from my work too, when you see a 11-year-old that's so hypervigilant, they're just on edge because they feel their personal safety from all aspects of society is after them. It just, it's a residual impact that people just don't understand unless you have contact or lived it yourself.
Right.
Well, let me just say that this has been hugely inspiring. I love these conversations. I love to hear from the various sectors about all the avenues and ways in which we're working on making lives better, which I think is our collective goal here. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank, Commissioner Sulai, Leon, the sheriff who had to jump off, all the contributors to this event, that helped organize it, Molly for obviously your leadership and bringing all this together through the nexus of Roca. And we're right on time. We're time certain. So I want everyone have a great day, and looking forward to future conversations. Special thanks to our sponsors and supporters.
Thank you. Bye.
I know.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.